He appeared in more than 100 films. He was an Oscar winner. Alongside Martin Luther King, he marched. They were brave, wise men who were familiar with their signatures on the Declaration of Independence. Declared to all that they would die for it. However, Peter Jennings froze when Charlton Heston said something in his final interview. At the age of 77, the actor who played Moses acknowledged that, despite having his 60-year-old wife by his side, his mental faculties were failing. Filming halted because the teen was so stunned. To the man who had once been America's most influential voice, no one knew what to say. On October 4, 1923, Charlton Heston was born in Cook County, Illinois, as John Charles Carter. 11 days later, his birth certificate was filed, identifying him as Charlton Carter. Although he stated in his memoirs that he was born in Wilmette, the majority of official sources indicate that he was born in Evanston. Some initial uncertainty regarding his past resulted from that mix-up. However, that is undoubtedly true. The occasional visit on Letterman, The Tonight Show, or Saturday Night Live. He was raised in the St. Helens, Michigan, woods. It was a solitary and peaceful place. He later referred to himself as a scrawny hick from the woods and hunted and fished virtually every day. Despite the conventional narrative that he changed his name later in life, census data from 1930 already listed him as Charlton J. Carter. His parents separated when he was 10 years old in 1933. Later on, his mother wed Chester Heston. He adopted the Heston name at that point. The majority of people thought Charlton was derived from his mother's last name, although that is untrue. Marion Charlton, his grandma, gave it to him. In order to avoid their biological father, his mother and aunt took his last name after being adopted by their grandfather when they were little. Heston's moniker remained constant as he aged and gained notoriety. His family always referred to him as Chuck. In 1941, at the age of 17, he starred in his first movie, Peer Gynt. Considering that sound movies had been around since the late 1920s, it was odd that this one was silent. Alan, his younger brother, also played a little role. Despite not being a big production, this movie was daring. It tried to remain faithful to the original play and featured Norwegian music. Later, one critic remarked that it had an eerie effect because of the silence. By that time, even Charlie Chaplin had moved on from silent movies. Although it was Heston's debut film role, critics frequently referred to it as one of his least significant roles. He enrolled at Northwestern University in the same year. He met Lydia Clark in a drama class in the spring of 1941. He worked hard hours and was impoverished and introverted. He worked any job he could find during the day and operated elevators at night. Despite everything, he still saw Lydia. They instantly fell in love. They were married in Greensboro, North Carolina, on March 17, 1944. He passed away in 2008, yet they remained together for 64 years. Fraser Clark Heston and Holly Heston Rochelle were the two children they reared. Their relationship remained solid despite being separated by film assignments. After 9 years of marriage, Heston once claimed to be more in love than he was on his wedding day. His debut on Suspense on March 15, 1949, marked the beginning of his television career. He made his Studio One debut on June 15, 1949, a few months later. He had the opportunity to perform complicated characters in that show. On December 12, 1949, he portrayed Edward Rochester in Jane Eyre. On October 30, 1950, he played Heathcliff in Wuthering Heights. Additionally, on October 22, 1951, he performed in Macbeth. He developed in these roles. Compared to other shows, Studio One received better sets and more funding from the CBS crew. At first, Heston appeared stiff to some. Others, however, took note of his presence and commanding speech. He was distinctive. The show was receiving around 500 scripts a week by 1955. Heston was developing into a genuine performer. You assume that's true when Betty Davis says it. However, I believe that I earned this honor by performing tasks that many others also perform. However, they take my picture when I perform them since I'm an actor. He took on two significant projects in 1950. He portrayed Mark Antony in a low-budget cinematic adaptation of Julius Caesar. In that Chicago performance, he was the sole paid actor. David Bradley, an old acquaintance from his youth, directed it. Dark City was his big Hollywood debut. He portrayed Danny Haley, a resentful gambler who operated an illicit bookmaker's shop. Heston was 25 years old. Despite the film's lackluster reception, director Cecil B. DeMille was impressed. DeMille cast him in The World's Greatest Show in 1952. Heston portrayed Brad Braden, a stern circus boss who had a secret tenderness. He gave a Bogart-like harshness to the character, according to critics. The movie took home the Best Picture Oscar. It demonstrated that Heston could be the star of a big-budget movie. He starred in 2 adventure movies in 1954. The Naked Jungle was the first. He portrayed Christopher Lanigan, a plantation owner battling a tight marriage and an army ant plague. For the ant sequences, director Byron Haskin produced innovative effects. The film's daring depiction of sexual tension between Heston and co-star Eleanor Parker was praised by critics. Heston then took a plane to Peru to film Secret of the Incas. It was the first major Hollywood production to use Machu Picchu for filming. The 16-person crew collaborated with 500 local extras. He portrayed treasure hunter Harry Steele, who was searching for a misplaced relic. Indiana Jones was later influenced by that position. Peruvian tourism also increased as a result of the movie. DeMille started casting for the 10 Commandments later in 1954. He initially desired Hopalong Cassidy actor William Boyd. Boyd declined since he worked in television. DeMille then turned to face Rock Hudson, Kirk Douglas, Dan Daly, and Jeff Chandler. The pivotal moment occurred when the Israeli government gave DeMille a sculpture of Michelangelo's Moses. He noticed how much the statue resembled Heston. That influenced his ultimate decision. He was unsure even at that time. Despite the fact that Heston was not particularly beautiful and had a menacing vibe, DeMille offered him the role, according to his journal. One final surprise was in store. Fraser, Heston's kid, had recently been born. Henry Wilcoxon, the producer, proposed that he play infant Moses in the scene with the basket. His age was just 3 months. DeMille concurred. In the sequences with the burning bush, Heston ended up portraying both Moses and the voice of God. He was more than merely an actor by 1956. He was now one of the most influential characters on television and the face of biblical epics. Ben-Hur was already slated to be the biggest and priciest movie Hollywood had ever produced when MGM began preparing it in the late 1950s. However, the quest for the ideal actor for the starring part became convoluted and time-consuming. Their initial pick wasn't Charlton Heston. On the list, he was not even close to the top. Burt Lancaster was initially offered the role by the studio. He declined it. The script, in his opinion, was dull and even hostile to Christianity. After that, they visited Paul Newman. He had recently acted in the unsuccessful biblical movie The Silver Chalice in 1954. It still made Newman feel ashamed, and he didn't want to do it again. He also made a joke about not having the legs to dress like a Roman. Marlon Brando died, too. The studio persisted in its efforts. Although several at MGM questioned Rock Hudson's ability to play the part, they still looked at him. Leslie Nielsen, who at the time was a serious actor and not yet well known for comedy, was even considered for the role at one point. Nothing was successful. In their desperation, MGM began considering Italian actors who could not even speak English. Director William Wyler looked to Charlton Heston at that point. In 1956, Heston had previously portrayed Moses in the 10 Commandments. The voice was his. He was present. He also had the appearance of someone who could steer a Roman chariot. It was a huge production. $1 million was spent on the chariot race alone. Filming lasted 3 months and 5 weeks. Over 200 kilometers of rail track were traversed during the race. As soon as Heston got to Rome, he began training. He spent 3 hours a day practicing chariot driving. He needed to get used to the twists and the horses. He used special contact lenses to shield his eyes from the dirt that would shoot up into his face. An actual accident resulted in one of the race's most well-known moments. The renowned stunt coordinator Yakima Canute was the father of stuntman Joe Canute. Joe was launched into the air on one jump and hit hard. Despite suffering a chin injury, he lived. In the finished movie, Wyler used that actual footage. Close-ups of Heston getting back into the chariot were used to piece it together. That shot turn became one of the film's most recognizable scenes. 78 trained horses imported from Sicily and Yugoslavia were employed in the production. The other teams utilized Lipizans, while Heston's team used Andalusians. Ben-Hur made a sensation when it was released in 1959. It took home 11 Oscars at the 32nd Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Actor for Heston. That established a record that stood for over 40 years until the Titanic broke it in 1997. Heston would never again win an Oscar in a competitive race. However, everything changed with this one performance. He then became the preferred actor in Hollywood for historical epics. He was dubbed the emblem of a period when Hollywood produced serious movies with serious heroes by critics. Heston had the authority to choose his own projects after Ben-Hur. He performed El Cid in 1961. In The Agony and the Ecstasy, he portrayed Michelangelo in 1965. He portrayed John the Baptist in The Greatest Story Ever Told that same year. According to Roger Ebert, Heston produced at least 3 movies that practically everyone has seen at some point: Planet of the Apes, The Ten Commandments, and Ben-Hur. However, despite all of this success, Heston made some unexpected decisions. Let's Make Love, a major studio movie starring Marilyn Monroe, was rejected by him in 1960. He headed to Broadway instead. He desired to collaborate with Laurence Olivier, who was directing Ben W. Levy's play The Tumbler. The play had a difficult beginning when it debuted in Boston. After only 5 shows, it relocated to New York and shut down in February 1960. It was described as horribly pretentious by Time magazine. It failed miserably. But it was worth it, Heston remarked. In 6 weeks, he learned more from Olivier than he could have learned on his own, he told journalist Joe Hyams. He and Gary Cooper created The Wreck of the Mary Dear later that year. It was a marine thriller that was adapted from a Hammond Innes book. There was mystery at the beginning of the story. But, in the middle, became a courtroom drama. The change in tone was not well received by critics. The weakest aspect, according to one reviewer, was the conclusion. The movie was still profitable. According to MGM figures, it made $1.65 million abroad and $1.165 million in the US and Canada. It made a little profit, considering it cost $2.6 million to make. Of $200,000. However, it fell short of the studio's expectations. Heston later claimed that the novel's impact was not adequately conveyed in the screenplay. He also attributed the courtroom scenes' poor quality to director Michael Anderson. Heston made a comeback to epics with El Cid in 1961. The film, which was shot in Spain over 9 months, gained notoriety for its off-camera events. Sophia Lawrence, Heston's co-star, and Heston hardly get along. The industry knew they hated each other. Behind the scenes, they were often fighting, despite their remarkable on-screen connection. Heston resisted when producer Samuel Bronston attempted to cast them together once more in The Fall of the Roman Empire. For Bronston, that choice led to issues. Some people think it contributed to his studio's financial demise. Patriots are always the first to hear the call for freedom when it trembles in the icy shadow of real danger. El Cid was a huge success at the box office. The outfits were authentic. The weapons were authentic. Even the Spanish troops participated as extras. Bronston amassed a fortune and used it to finance other epics. However, Heston started to feel confined. He had portrayed Moses. He had portrayed Ben-Hur. He was now portraying another historical figure. He was concerned that he would be permanently confined to these positions. With the release of Planet of the Apes in 1968, Charlton Heston's career underwent a dramatic swing. It altered the appearance and feel of science fiction. The makeup on the apes was quite difficult. Applying it took up to 7 hours, and taking it off took 3 hours. Actors would therefore have to report for duty at 2 in the morning. Until 10 o'clock at night. John Chambers, a makeup artist, used unique paint that didn't clog pores and foam rubber that allowed skin to breathe to remedy the issue. The first day of filming was May 21, 1967. The studio claimed to have spent $1 million on makeup, while in reality, it spent $345,000. It was difficult to shoot. In the scorching desert, the performers donned complete prosthetics. To keep their makeup intact, they sipped liquid meals with straws. They unintentionally categorized themselves by monkey species off camera. Orangutans sat with orangutans, and gorillas sat with other gorillas. To capture the astronauts sliding down hills, cinematographer Leon Shamroy constructed a metal sled. At the same time, Heston was the subject of false allegations in a satirical essay. It claimed that in May 1967, he brought a stagehand out for drinks and made offensive remarks to her. It even made fun of the fact that she had nightmares about Heston dressed like an ape. It was a work of fiction. By mimicking the format of actual news, it made fun of cancel culture. Heston featured in The Omega Man in 1971. Richard Matheson's I Am Legend served as its inspiration. After the world was decimated by a pandemic, Heston portrayed a guy by himself. In the US and Canada, the film brought in $4 million. Matheson claimed he didn't care because it was so far from his work. It developed become a cult favorite over time. Known as his desert island pick, Tim Burton claimed that it was the first movie he had ever seen with amusing action sequences. Then, in 1973, came Soylent Green. It took place in 2022 in a 40 million person, polluted New York. Due to overpopulation and the greenhouse effect, the Earth was collapsing. One of the earliest movies to discuss climate change was this one. It was based on Harry Harrison's 1966 book Make Room, Make Room. However, the novel did not include the human element that Soylent Green is known for. That was inserted by screenwriter Stanley Greenberg. Harrison detested it. Green filters were utilized by cinematographer Richard Klein to give the movie a poisonous, sickly appearance. Heston starred in Earthquake in 1974. The most stunt performers at the time, 141, were used in the movie. Heston was 50 years old. He continued to perform many of his own stunts. To simulate actual tremors, the camera system shook the entire frame. 6-ton chunks of concrete were inches from stunt workers. At a flood scene, one was rendered unconscious. An elevator accident injured another. Heston directed Antony and Cleopatra in 1972. The project was a dream. He requested that Orson Welles direct, but when Welles declined, he took over. Reviewers detested the movie. The naval combat appeared cheesy and featured Ben-Hur's repurposed images. Heston ignored pacing and granted himself extended close-ups. The movie failed and never came back. Charlton Heston wasn't always the conservative figure that most people associate with him. He was a devoted Democrat in the 1950s. He ran for office for the first time in 1956. When, in opposition to Dwight Eisenhower, he backed Adlai Stevenson. Heston continued to compete, but Stevenson lost. In 1960, he supported John F. Kennedy and rejoiced over his victory. Heston evolved from a supporter to more than that by the early 1960s. He actually did something about it. When most performers remained mute, he entered the civil rights movement. Heston did not stand in the background when he and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. marched in Washington on August 28, 1963. The arts group that day was led by him. There were about 250,000 people at the Lincoln Memorial. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen of the National Rifle Association. Mr. Charlton Heston is your first vice president. Later on, Heston declared it to be the most significant event in the civil rights movement. March, in his opinion, aided in getting the Civil Rights Act passed by Congress the following year. Given that Heston had portrayed Moses in the Ten Commandments only 7 years prior, his description of Dr. King as a Moses of the 20th century struck a deep chord. Even though he was aware that his actions would harm his career, he persisted. I marched for civil rights with Dr. King in 1963, long before Hollywood thought it was appropriate, he once remarked. He thought that for democracy to be effective, people had to stand up for it. According to him, you must believe in democracy's operation if you support it. Heston's opinions, however, were not static. He demanded tougher gun regulations following the 1968 assassinations of Drive King and Robert Kennedy. He claimed that Congress needed stricter regulations on rifles, shotguns, and pistols because they weren't doing enough. However, he evolved throughout time. His opinions began to change in 1972 while he was filming The Omega Man. He had joined the NRA by the late 1990s. He became a member of the NRA board in 1997. He was elected president in 1998. He held the position till 2003. The number of NRA members surpassed 4 million under his presidency. He took the stage at the NRA convention in Charlotte in 2000. A rifle was placed above his head. From my icy, lifeless palms, he said the now famous words. It was a pivotal event. At a time when Democrats were retreating from that discussion, Heston emerged as the spokesperson for the gun rights movement. That change in Second Amendment support, in his opinion, was almost a promise come true. He viewed it as a win for individual liberty. He delivered a stirring speech at Harvard Law School in 1999. February 16 was the date. There were several people in the room. Heston informed the students that they belonged to the generation that had been politically silent in America since the beginning of the revolution. He claimed that their quiet was an indication of fear. He discussed how, during marches in the 1960s, individuals used labels like black and Negro. However, those identical words were now prohibited in speech. "I don't want to write a book right now," he added. "The last one I sold was recently completed. I'm going to do a movie now," I said. He told me the title after saying no. "Oh, you got me," I said. Yes. He saw this as an indication that free speech was no longer permitted. He won the cultural war by calling the speech. He cautioned that it is easier to tell individuals what to do once they have been told what to say. Like Dr. King, he urged the students to fight against that pressure. He asserted that nonviolent protest was still important. Then an unexpected moment arrived. Heston disclosed in August 2000 that he had gone to treatment earlier that year. He stayed at a center in Utah from late May to mid-June. His age was 76. Years ago, he told the National Enquirer, he had stopped drinking whiskey, but had taken to consuming excessive amounts of white wine. He drank at dinner parties and on airplanes. He claimed he wasn't stumbling or slurring, but he was aware that it had gotten out of hand. Lisa DiMatteo, his publicist, claimed that his schedule contributed to the problem. He was running for office for George W. Bush, leading the National Rifle Association, and presenting the play Love Letters with his wife Lydia. Heston added that he was deeply affected by the negative reviews he received from London critics following his performance in the West End. However, his kid and wife were the ones who ultimately persuaded him to seek assistance. On March 17, 1944, Charlton and Lydia tied the knot in Greensboro, North Carolina. He was on his way with the Air Corps to the Aleutian Islands. The marriage would endure 2 weeks, according to her father. 64 years passed during the time. There were problems in their relationship. He frequently traveled for events and movie shoots. He claimed that being apart from her made him realize how isolating life can be. They were not at all alike. Despite his lack of organization, he was always on time. She was highly tidy and frequently late. There were rumors of arguments and cheating. Heston denied everything. Since he was 17, he claimed to have adored Lydia. He had no desire to jeopardize their marriage. They acquired fighting skills. One of their rules was to never sleep before resolving a dispute. During hip surgery in 1998, surgeons made a discovery. Heston had cancer of the prostate. He was 73. Although the diagnosis was unexpected, it was made early. It wasn't life-threatening, he claimed. But he had a decision to make. In order to complete filming and back Republican candidates in the 1998 election, he postponed therapy. Then he started therapy. Every day of the week, he was exposed to radiation. He came to treatment every morning at 7 a.m. He then started working. He was working with Diane Keaton and Warren Beatty on the movie Town and Country at the time. He didn't even pause. He declared himself cancer-free in 2001. Charlton Heston sat by himself on screen on August 9, 2002. He spoke steadily. His gaze was fixed. The actor who portrayed Moses in Ben-Hur at the age of 77 disclosed something much more intimate than any part. "I'm exercising a right that was bestowed upon me by the wise old white men who founded this nation." Alzheimer's disease-like signs had been identified in him. Just 2 days prior, on August 7, the video message had been filmed in a private setting without any journalists or crowds. Later, Lisa Powers, his spokesperson, clarified the reason. He wanted the words to be just so. From beginning to end, he wanted to say them himself. It had a simple background. It had a tight frame. Heston's influence remained strong. This time, however, there was only the truth, neither a script nor an audience. He looked into the camera and said, "I wanted to prepare a few words for you now because when the time comes, I may not be able to." Then he added something that cut even deeper. "An actor, there's no greater loss than the loss of his audience. I can part the Red Sea, but I can't part with you." He didn't hide from what was coming. Instead, he faced it head-on. Despite the diagnosis, Heston refused to step away immediately from public life. He said he would continue to serve as president of the National Rifle Association until April 2003. He planned to keep speaking at political events as long as he could. And before ending the message, he quoted lines from Shakespeare's The Tempest, spoken from memory, one last moment of performance from a man who had built his life around the stage. Just 4 months later, in December 2002, he gave what would become his final televised interview. ABC's Peter Jennings sat with him at his home. Lydia, his wife of nearly 60 years, stayed by his side. The change in Heston was already visible. He spoke more slowly. Sometimes he forgot words. At times, he repeated himself. But he remained aware of what was happening. When Jennings asked him about his illness, Heston didn't hesitate. He said that was his fear, not just forgetting, but no longer being able to say goodbye. That's why he made his diagnosis public. He said he never wanted to reach a point where he couldn't share that part of his life. I can part the Red Sea, but I can't part with you, which is why I won't exclude you from this stage in my life. After the announcement, support poured in. One of the first to call was Nancy Reagan. She didn't ask to speak with Charlton. She wanted to speak with Lydia. She knew from her own life that Alzheimer's didn't just affect the person diagnosed. It changed everything for the people who cared for them, too. Charlton Heston lived with Alzheimer's for over 5 years. On April 5, 2008, he died at home in Beverly Hills. He was 84. The official cause was complications from the disease. By then, he had been silent for some time. But the tributes were loud and full of praise. President George W. Bush, who had awarded Heston the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2003, called him man of character and integrity with a big heart. He mentioned Heston's service in World War II, his work in the Civil Rights Movement, his leadership in the Screen Actors Guild, and his fierce defense of the Second Amendment. Nancy Reagan said she was heartbroken. She called him a hero in real life, not just on screen. In her words, he had always stepped up to support her husband. Back in 2003, when Heston stepped down from the NRA, Florida Governor Jeb Bush told him something that stood out. He said, "Were it not for your active involvement, it's safe to say my brother may not have been President of the United States." That one line said everything about Heston's political influence during the 2000 election. His funeral took place on April 12, 2008, at the Episcopal Parish of St. Matthew's in Pacific Palisades, the church where he had worshipped since the early 1980s. About 250 people attended. It was a gathering of Hollywood legends and political figures. Nancy Reagan came. So did Arnold Schwarzenegger, Olivia de Havilland, Tom Selleck, Oliver Stone, and Christian Bale. After the ceremony, Heston was cremated. His ashes were returned to the family he had loved and protected for 64 years.